Hello and welcome back to Parley. These are my on-the-spot responses to the prompts you folks submit, but this is also crew Parley, which means I submitted the prompt originally, and then you all responded, and now I'm responding to the responses. The prompt I submitted for this one was positive trends in game design. Here I mean trend like not a social trend, like advancements in game design that are statistically forming a pattern at the moment. You know what I mean? Like, I just thought people would know what I meant, but I don't mean trendy, really. I mean like a statistical trend. And we've got some really good ones. So for this one, before I even redo the prompt, I'll just tell you the three responses, and they're pretty good, that people think are positive trends in game design right now are proximity chat, pseudo social media, like in-game, but that isn't real. I know that one's weird, but it's actually really cool. And then clearly communicated dev intent during early access, or like in general, patch notes being better. And I would agree, these are some great things that are getting better in the industry. So my prompt was, tell us about something you were pleasantly surprised by in a game recently, which you'd like to see more of in the future. It's completely okay if there's no real way to substantiate that this even is a trend or a pattern in the works. I encourage you to totally reach and make something more of a potentially rather small thing you were happy to see. I also welcome double negatives here. You could tell us about something you're seeing less of, which you're glad is on its way out, but nobody did that. That might be harder to do. It's also not, in a way, I feel like in the spirit of the parlay. My idea was, it's not bad to show the positive side. I'm just not worried about discussing the negative side. I just felt like we'd done that enough. So again, three responses, and they're pretty solid. We have proximity chat, the like fake social media in game is a mechanic thing, and I want to say something about like phones and social media in general in fiction actually is a really interesting trend that's part of. And then clearly communicated dev intent for early access plus better patch notes. So starting with the proximity chat one, Just Rusty, thank you very much. I think the rise of proximity chat in games has been wonderful. Outside of a couple 360 or like PS3 era titles, such as Halo, which took advantage of the fact console gamers needed to use in-game systems to allow you to hear enemy comms if you were close enough to a player from the opposing team. So that's what this is, if you're not familiar. Proximity voice chat is the idea that you talk into your microphone while playing a game. Other players can hear you talk, but they hear you talk as if your character in the game is emanating the sound like a real speaker. So if you're far away from them and they yell, you might be able to hear them, but the idea is to mimic the amount you'd be able to hear them if they were yelling that far away from you in real life. And then you can hear them closer if they're closer, you know. You could even do, I don't know why you would do this, but it sounds fun. You're sneaking around looking for someone hiding in a building to, you know, defeat them in a battle royale game or something. You could even just say out loud, where are you? And the person will hear as if you're moving about the space, though they might get an idea of where you are because it's designed to be like relatively realistic. It's a cool feature. I didn't know this. You're saying that basically the history is that it was a way to do voice chat with consoles, if I'm understanding correctly. I didn't know that. That's cool. Anyway, this is a feature, Just Rusty continues, which has very much gone out of fashion with the rise of apps like Discord and even just non-gaming group call systems like Skype being so readily available, compared to historical options such as TeamSpeak and similar, which were moderately technical, required a PC, and chewed into bandwidth, which was at the time much less available. Right, if you previously had TeamSpeak, you were sacrificing some bandwidth to run the server yourself, basically, or like pay to own one somewhere else. Since the game Lethal Company, we've seen more and more co-op games use the feature as a way to limit comms between team members in other games, often for comedic reasons as much as they are a gameplay device. Peak being the most recent example I've played. Don't know about that one. Yeah, this is a mechanic that I feel like has a lot of potential. And in general, I feel like audio in video games is something that technologically we're in a pretty good place. And mechanically, there's a lot of potential, especially in basically any game where you move through 3D space. Just in general, I think that human beings broadly, not even related to video games, somewhat underuse their other senses, which can be extremely useful. And I think it's mostly smell and sound, smell and hearing, that most people don't use as much as they are useful to use. Simply getting used to smelling things and hearing things, getting used to hearing unexpected or somewhat unpleasant smells and sounds, hearing smells, of course. You know what I mean? is interesting and worthwhile. I might then posit, obviously, what I'm suggesting is maybe people don't use these as much as they might enjoy them. Like maybe this is an underused type of feature, relatively speaking. Or, it could be represented in the data by something like not as many people as the developers who do this would hope actually use it. I'm not saying that's true though, by the way. I'm just speculating like why maybe isn't this somewhat more common? Could it possibly be humanity's somewhat weak relationship with hearing as a sense in the first place? But I kind of doubt that's why. The game that comes to mind for me is particularly Hunt Showdown. Hunt Showdown does have, I believe, but doesn't often heavily use proximity voice chat. If it does exist in the game, people really don't use it overall, as far as I'm aware, at least when I played, because the game is catastrophically balanced around sound in a way that we don't have like totally the time to just derail the whole parlay about, but I'm just going to tell you about for a minute. So this is a battle royale game where you play with very few players, so like 10 to 12 to give you an idea, and you're on a pretty small map. The goal of the game is to, well, find points and extract with them. If you kill and track down, kill, and then survive with, if you kill the boss monster in the level, then you can get tokens which give your character experience, and you can progress in the game with that character. But this character you're playing in this battle royale match also has permadeath and will be deleted from your account, losing you any experience and gear they had if they die in this battle royale. So it's an interesting kind of player versus environment, kill the boss, player versus player, kill the other players to defend yourself or steal their boss token, and also kind of like player versus the metacognition about the game. But maybe I want to do neither of those things and just leave. You can do that, and this might gain you some experience. You could like loot guns off people and stuff, I believe. Like you could potentially upgrade your gear that way. But more of it would be this character is kind of good, and I just don't think I'm going to gain something by trying to win. Therefore, I will save the character and simply run away, which I think is a really cool choice. Now, I think this game is also ridiculously sweaty, and one of the sweaty parts is that it has amazing positional audio. You're sneaking around and engaging with the NPC enemies like zombies and monsters and stuff, or against other players. If you shoot in this game is so quiet, this game is such accurate positional audio, you are screwed if you make a sound. I mean, you kind of have to make some sounds, but you need to do something if you make noise in this game. And so it's an interesting case where it's a game very built around audio, and I would argue that's related. It's a game where positional audio, proximity voice chat might exist, but wouldn't be used, which I think is kind of interesting. But it is a game that I brought up because it relies on this idea that people would heavily use their hearing when playing games, but maybe do or don't. Hunt Showdown is a game with complex popularity. It had some rough times and then has had some resurgences over the years. It would be easy to attribute that to the game simply being very hard and sweaty and being, I don't know if that many people want something where you're so likely to lose a battle royale, but then also permadeath is, yeah, to some people that's like, and then for other people it will push their buttons because it raises the stakes. But that's probably why. But I just wanted to suggest that maybe it has to do with the proximity audio thing. Having used proximity audio and proximity voice chat a little bit myself, and particularly proximity or like digital surround sound audio headphones in like battle royale games like PUBG and Apex Legends is where I've used them. It feels like cheating in like close quarters. I honestly feel like I have wall hacks in some of these games when you have good headphones, and the game has like pretty well implemented this. PUBG is a game where I feel like it's enough of an advantage that you will notice that. I'm just talking about proximity audio at this point. But I think that's a huge thing. And so I can only imagine, as someone who doesn't use proximity voice chat that much, how huge of a thing it at least could be. And I don't think for a lot of these, they need to be, well, again, we're not talking about trendy or popular. Like, it doesn't really matter. You can imagine the impact pretty easily, though, yeah? It's the kind of thing where you and your friends playing something, I can very easily see that being very fun. It's interesting how you say, like originally this was kind of a competitive trolling feature, I would argue, but has become more of a co-op feature where you sort of have fun with the fact that you don't have perfect ability to communicate in a space. I think this is a really good sign. Kind of like something like tabletop role-playing games, D&D and such. Well, the ability to sort of have a magic circle and say, we could bypass this restriction or rule, but we're just agreeing to sort of opt into it a little bit, is great, very powerful. For you as a developer specifically, I think this is a lot of buy-in from players. I think if players are willing to do that, you have a lot of power as the developer. You can create a very fun and unique experience for them as long as they can kind of come to it on their own that way. And so the idea that co-op games would use this a lot is sort of unexpected, weird, but that's really cool. And I feel like a very coherent. I would expect that would be popular and would work with the audience that it's looking for. Again, not popular necessarily, but that it would be a thing people would like. So I just wanted to bring up the idea as well that maybe it has to do with people engaging with using their ears so heavily when playing games. That is like a different experience to an extent, for sure. They say like after a game of Hunt Showdown, you have to like, take a shower, honestly. And so that's the kind of thing where I can see people, not being up for that. But if you're just messing around with your friends, it sounds like it could be pretty fun to have, I don't know, I'm thinking of like Prop Hunt or something, if that has proximity voice chat. I could see, I don't really play these kinds of games, but could totally see that being fun. Yeah, it's cool. I think that in particular, co-op games in general are a really interesting space where we're seeing a lot of innovation and a lot of sort of, I don't really know what to call it, like maladaptation innovation, games being made for people who have no time and no patience for mechanics as gaming kind of reaches its mainstream cultural maturity a little bit. It's immature maturity. We get a lot of games that are kind of like they sort of try to do as little as possible out of anxiety that will put the player off. This is fine, by the way. You enjoy these. This is not a problem. I'm just saying it is a little odd in gaming as a medium that a lot of games are sort of trying not to be a game, but also a lot of them are. And a lot of them, I think, are experimenting with new ways to kind of play with players in a group space together. I love seeing all the asymmetrical multiplayer games, most of which are competitive, PvP affairs, stuff like that. But that's cool in general. It's not for most people's tables, but I actually think that D&D or tabletop role-playing games having asymmetry, that is, there's like a game master and then players, and they don't really play in the same way. If you can get the game master's role to be better, like a better experience for them, you can get it so that that's like a way you play. You're playing, you're not just running the game, you're not doing people a favor. It's fun to run the game if you optimize it a certain way. And I think that trend is very positive. I think the idea that people sort of compromise or like adjust to have a good time is something I'm very happy to see. And that being sort of setting the pace for game design. That was my point with it sort of opening up more. Gaming is becoming this kind of mainstream mainstay thing that of course it was always going to be. It's exciting to see that what's setting the tempo of that is, I think, a pretty decent period of innovation in game design in general. To zoom out slightly from this parlay, yeah, I mean, I ask this right now because I personally think that we're seeing a pretty good period of innovation in game design, like a quite strong period for games. And you could chalk that up to any number of influences. You could chalk it up to more capital in the market. You could chalk it up to other media having a little bit of a struggle and then enough investors understanding that you could maybe do this instead. Those are the boring financial reasons, or at least some of them. But it's probably those things, to a significant extent. I would also say that COVID and the kind of gun-shy AAA industry, or like AAA troubles in gaming specifically, plus COVID sort of led to a indie boom somehow, kind of led more into the indie boom we were already kind of having. And I sort of feel like we're having another one, or it's still happening. And there's just been a lot of incredible and powerful titles from very small teams. Obviously, also technology increasing. That we're probably at the tail end of that, but the access for gaming has exploded. It's extremely easy to the point of it almost being trivial to get started making a game for usually free. You can use Game Maker And you could use AI coding tools to help you figure it out if you don't have any experience doing this. GameMaker actually lets you do a kind of module-based system that doesn't allow require you to learn computer programming, doesn't allow you, Freudian slip, to learn computer programming. So you could get started that way as well. Maybe for obvious reasons, we don't need to go into it more. Game jams are also really popular, so there's lots of times to test your mettle if you're excited getting into making games. So that's something as well. Sure. I mean, it's a booming time. But specifically, I was also just interested to see what kinds of things you would all mention. Is it going to be things like this build system style? That's what I would say. I don't know if you want to hear my version of this parlay. You know what I mean? If I was asked this prompt as a question, you know what? I'm going to do this prompt as a question. The prompt, if it were given to me, would be tell me this other Zandy is asking about something you were pleasantly surprised by in a game recently, which you'd like to see more of in the future. It's completely okay, blah, blah, blah. I'm asked that prompt as like a normal parlay. I'm not going to do the whole response. Don't worry, I won't derail this that badly. But I think it's relevant. I would have said something like very mechanical, you know? All of the features that I mentioned, the proximity chat, the pseudo social media thing, and then like patch notes and early access disclosure, these are like meta industry things. I suppose I did see, say, like trends in general, but I was thinking of it as like surprised in a game. This mechanic or this item in the game was really cool. I'm not sure that's actually the most meaningful place for trends. I mean, I just said I feel like we're in a very innovative period. So Zandy, tell us, what are all of the innovations in mechanics? You're going to talk about like game design, right? So tell us about all the innovations. Yeah, so basically I actually don't think it's that much of an innovative period for build system game design specifically. And so it's interesting in that way. That is why I asked this parlay. I was curious to feel excited about the definitely innovative things happening in the gaming industry, but just in my opinion actually not that much at the moment for this thing. Now, I don't think this is an issue. I think that build systems will have their moment more, and put a pin in it. They kind of are having a moment now. We'll have a moment more as gaming matures as a medium. I feel like we've just reached like near cultural saturation type of feeling. We're probably not actually there with, you know, gaming is a very universal and effective and efficient hobby. And it does make sense for almost everybody to be playing video games in some form. And now we're a little bit close to that actually being the case, is the point I'm trying to make. Previously, gaming was a totally nonsensically niche hobby, and I don't think it is anymore in most of the world, but it's not yet reached that sort of saturation that, like, logically, this is one of the most powerful forms of entertainment in terms of overall benefits, and I'm using the word powerful a little more than average today, I guess. But you get, it's very good. It's a good deal. It's efficient. There's lots of variety. Things can be adapted to your tastes, and yet there's also a lot of interactivity. You kind of have an experience a bit more than other kinds of media. It's okay to just be entertained. That still is doing something. Calmly sitting on the couch and watching a movie with great focus and enjoying it and having a deep introspective philosophical diatribe about it is doing something. Like, that's not just sitting around. That's cool. That's living life. That's a fun thing. But there is still some power and novelty in like physically doing something with games, of course. I would have said stuff like, yeah, you know, games are including the explanations of abilities, you know, of effects much more often. We're getting stuff like Pokemon Champions, which is basically just a free to play. You don't have to do any of the farming of the Pokemon. You just get to play the Pokemon and manipulate their stats as much as you want. You don't have to catch them. You don't have to train them. You don't have to go seek out TMs to teach them moves. You don't have to breed them. You don't have to do any wonky things to train their EVs. You can literally just pick the stuff you want and play competitive Pokemon. I feel that this is a product that would not as likely have been on offer previously. The saturation of the gaming industry means that we're in a period where I think you see people understanding games more, and therefore it's a lot more feasible to ask people to do something which is literally just getting involved in game mechanics. Even playing competitive. If you've played any competitive Pokemon, this is like chess with game mechanic pieces. You know what I mean? Like Path of Exile chess. Make a build to get through playing this insane wonky version of chess that it's like all thinking about the mechanics. There's no other, even the gameplay is basically just anyway. So you can probably see where I'm going with this. Obviously, if build systems are a relatively involved or crunchy, good build systems aren't overcomplicated, but I think they're still more complicated than games without build systems a lot of the time. That's going to be more appealing the more people understand game design. And this is a period where that is increasing, but maybe isn't quite at its critical threshold yet. Could I propose? And so a lot of the types of things I would have brought up would be I'm waiting to see more of, or another game where this is done, etc. So I was just very interested to note that a lot of the things you all mentioned were not really like that. Another example, iPatch Notes says something I've appreciated is pseudo social media, like social media, one might say. No one would ever say that is crossed out. In games with large rosters and highly produced, animated, voiced, etc. cutscenes, a brief text chat is enough to bridge some communication gaps. Just the character the player likes saying, hello, how do you do, goes a long way if they're not in the story's zeitgeist. So the idea here is that a lot of games that already have this like pronounced roster of characters already put a lot of effort into characterization and like personalities and character art and etc. It might be like gachapon related monetization games, but it could also be very narrative focused experiences. I've experienced this in both kinds of games so far, one each personally. The idea is that so in one example, you literally have a smartphone button that you can hit in the game that opens up your phone, and you can like look at the characters, click one, and it will give you a text conversation with them. Obviously, it's not like with a real person. And to be clear, it's not something like AI or like a chat bot. These are pre-programmed but carefully packaged, or you could say disguised, conversations that the writers of the game wrote so that you have some kind of ambiance and you can sort of touch base with a character. For example, in this one game I'm thinking of, you can use this phone option to go do like an activity, like a social thing in the like, not really dating, but sort of like hang out with your characters, like social aspect of loop of the game. You can hit your phone to jump to that character. So it's very natural to just do that on the home screen of the game, perhaps also hit the text thing. And characters have, it seems like rather a lot, like 5 to 10 per character. A lot is what it seems like to me. That might be wrong, but I've seen a lot for some characters. Conversations kind of keyed in. And so you'll click it and they'll go like, hey, are you free right now? And then the game will automatically say one thing if you don't have dialogue choices here, or will often give you two. You chat for a little bit, and it's just a little scene. Again, it's not that interactive, but it's just a short scene with the character, with everyone in character. If you're the lieutenant of a sailing vessel, the lieutenant, if you must, they might be saying, I'm feeling seasick, or I need to talk to the captain or something. It would be like in character stuff. Often it will be something that they just like to. Like there was this person who liked this one kind of merch or something, and so she wants you to go get it with her. I don't know, that was an example. You go on a datey thing, which is the thing this game is trying to do. I don't know, wasn't much to me, but I still think it's kind of nice as an idea. I want to finish reading this idea because I want to know what you like about this. You know what I mean? This is a trend I've noticed, but I'm just not convinced is good or bad, basically. Is this trend recent? No, not really. iPatch Notes continues. My first memorable brush with it is in Crush Crush, of all things. Vaguely romantic incremental game with a large roster of full characters, and some who are only available by text message. Only available by text message is crazy. What is Crush Crush? Is it Candy Crush with waifus? It kind of looks like Candy Crush with waifus. Ooh, there's a sub thing called Phone Flings, which is funny. So it must be a mobile game with a like dating thing. And I don't know what other gameplay loops. Interesting. The color palette of this game is wild. Anyway, uh, okay, delightful. This social media game, that's going to be hard for me to get used to. Pseudo social media game, let's go with it. This social media implementation stood out to me because players could vote on which text only girl would get promoted to full roster status. Okay, that's ambitious, interesting. So that was neat. Damn right, Sawyer won. Apparently, a favorite of yours won. Very interesting. Okay, so this is a case where what? All right, you are selling me on this now. Okay, so this was a game where it was a way to weave in minor characters and basically like poll or interview the audience to see which character people liked enough that they should add them to the main game. That's fascinating. I'll add another example of my own that is like anyway, which is Mystic Messenger. Mystic Messenger is like a reverse harem game. So it's like you're uh stereotypical happy-go-lucky shoujo protagonist girl and a bunch of like hot but also a little bit mysterious, but that's also kind of hot dudes are talking to you on the phone because you receive a mysterious mystic message. It's called Mystic Messenger. I actually think this is kind of okay. So if you wish to dive into it yourself, no spoilers. How delightful. But Mystic Messenger will literally do things like have the character voiced call you on your phone when the app is installed on your phone. Not like call you, but the game will simulate this, right? And the entire gameplay loop is you texting people and having like limited opportunity cost for you texting people like at a certain time and then that's your slot, or like not every guy can call you to say goodnight, like if you can imagine it that way. So a pair of dating, I was reminded because you brought up a dating game, I have the another gender identity of dating game that you could do. Sure, this is an obvious place to use them. I think where it's a little bit more interesting is where it's used in games where it is very not obvious to do this, like Warframe. Warframe has social media, end of commentary, because ask me the last time I played Warframe seriously. But it does contain this, right? In what was that one up? Warframe 1999, I believe, is where we previewed this. The idea that dating or social game with Warframe could be kind of interesting. I will add that I think this is a member of a larger trend, not the pin I put in. I'll bring that up in a minute. Another larger trend, which is basically like games having other games inside of them. For a long time, we had the kind of roguelike indie boom, but now there's kind of a trend happening where a lot of games that are not purely a roguelike add a roguelike mode in and intend to get it to exist symbiotically with the rest of the game to varying results. C note at Chaos Zero Nightmare is the most recent born yesteryear example to me and strikes a weird balance. The feature is called Unigram in Chaos Zero Nightmare. First, why are Unigram conversations not replayable? I'm sure they will be eventually. Second, there's not really branching dialogue, just one conclusion that I was describing before, that the player may be lukewarm to, and even then it does not really tie back to the core gameplay loop. Going on dates, excursions, almost does a better job fleshing out a character since there are 7 distinct topics with 2 responses each. Also, these excursions are not possible if the character is in need of therapy. Why are you trying to date them now, Captain? Indeed, if in the actual gameplay loop of this game, your character undergoes trauma, you cannot go do any of this stuff like until you go do the therapy treatment part of the game, which that's, I don't know, immersive, I guess. And obviously, on some level, this is immersive, especially if you play on a phone. I definitely think this could be much more immersive. I definitely play games on my phone, but I don't play enough that I feel like I've experienced that much. Really, Mystic Messenger is my main rep there. Even Chaos Zero Nightmare, like I don't play very much on my phone. I actually don't completely know what the Unigram feature is like on a phone. Anyway, I guess I'll have to try that. But I use it on desktop. Anyway, problem is there are excursions that are self-contained stories and not building on one narrative like Unigrams are. Maybe they will quality of life these someday. Yeah, it's an interesting place for the game to be, right? There are 2 different types of social, at least 2 different types of social event in this game. And as I said, while the Unigram does link you to the excursions part of the game as well, yeah, like maybe these are sort of doing the same job. And so we already kind of have something that does a better job. It's interesting. I mean, I think that most of the text conversations do a good job by being the beginning of a conversation. And the best ones, in my opinion, are when the character asks you to do something and then the game lets you click a link and you like go do the thing. And there's a scene, like a visual novel style scene, where you do the thing with the character. Again, they want to go shopping for that merch and they go, dude, come on, we got to go right now. And your character goes, bah. And then there's a button. And you, if you want to now, you can hit it and it will jump you to that scene. Like you just like go do it, if you will. Is an interesting like visual novel idea. To me, I think it's that point you made about it not hooking into the rest of the gameplay loop that much. You know, it does increase their like friendship level or heart level or something, which gives you extremely minor gameplay benefits. But I think that would be the key, is making this into gameplay is kind of hard. Let's explore for a minute. So one reason it's hard is that you could do something like social points, but it's not enjoyable to have a conversation when you think about social points. Do I need to defend that? Anyway, that's what I don't think that will work. That's my explanation for why. I don't think that will be fun. It will work, you know, it'll work just fine. I'm sure someone will do that within the year. I've just received a notification that someone is making a game just this week that has that feature, but I'm saying I don't think it's going to be good. That absolutely for sure will exist, but I don't think that's a good idea. Or, you know, there's things like the meme in Baldur's Gate 3 where you say something, and sometimes when you pick dialogue options in Baldur's Gate 3, it increases your reputation or like how much people like you in your party, or decreases it. And the way the game represents this is extremely funny to me and some of the community. I don't know why this tickles my funny bone so much, but you click a dialogue option, and then before anything else happens, or like right as the character you're talking to starts to respond, in the top left corner, it pops up like Shadowheart is pleased, Asterion is displeased, like whatever. You can say something like, let's save them. And your party will go, Minthara is displeased. Like, shut up, man. Like, we're trying to get experience. I love that one, but I think it's good because it kind of doesn't do anything or matter. It kind of does do something. Baldur's Gate 3 people, I know, but like, come on, it's not a huge part of the game. And it's kind of ridiculous, you know. If you made that system more strict, I do not think that would be that much fun. And I know that because I installed a mod that makes it so when you pick a dialogue option, you can see what like changes to a character there will be. And I think that in a game with really impactful choices, that can be asinine. You know, you get very routed and often have to do like quite dissonant things that don't have very good synergy with each other in the world, like as you travel through the world. Sometimes you want an item for a build for which you need to say this dialogue option, and like it just doesn't. It's fine. You can just say this and upset Minthara. It's not a big deal. She'll still, you know, you can go on the dates or whatever. You did kill all those people after all, didn't you? It's not a huge deal, but I'm just saying I don't think that it adds to the game. And so if you were to lean into that more, I don't expect that would actually go that well. However, if you make it so that the text conversations or the social media part of the game isn't like social media point score thing, and it's instead something totally unrelated, then you get something like Honey Pop, where you do the sex scenes by playing Bejeweled. That's real. I'll just repeat again. You do the sex scenes by playing Bejeweled. That's a real thing, unfortunately. And I have now blighted your mind with its existence. I don't think that this works either. Of course, in this example in Chaos Zero Nightmare, it actually doesn't do either, which it's funny. In some ways, it's kind of better, was the point I was leading up to. But basically just because the other options are so bad that there's one more example that's really noteworthy. I haven't played this, I've just seen it, but it is a very noteworthy example that I would think if you like this topic, you'd want to know. Not necessarily you, eye patch notes, you may already know of this. What's it called? Hold on, I'll be able to find it. It's like not Stacklands, no, that's something else, but instead not Borderlands. Man, if I can think of it, I'll tell you or find it somewhere. We'll definitely bring this up again. This is the type of topic that it gets in my brain and then it'll be in like the next few parlay. I'll probably think of it, but yeah, anyway, in this game, I can describe it to you. When a conversation happens, it's treated exactly like combat. This is a card-based, turn-based, I believe, battle game, but your cards essentially have a different version of the card that is an attack verbally or like in a social encounter. So social encounters in this game are literally just combat, or they're like a riff on combat. Very odd, interesting idea. You could even do something where you make, again, a combat like loop that doesn't have the same content as actually attacking. I really didn't like this, but in Paper Mario The Origami King, there's this, I think, terrible combat system where basically Mario has to like navigate through I almost want to describe it like Mario Party like maze of tiles and board kind of to get to the boss. That's not a bad idea. I just don't think it was that good in that game. And I liked the rest of that game a lot. I just think the combat is really bad and quite tedious, the normal combat. Not good. And they changed it because they felt like they needed to innovate for innovation's sake. I feel like that is another, you can really feel like this isn't here because it's a good idea, it's here because it's a different idea. That being said, the advantage of that is that it could be a very good idea. I'm just not sure it's that good of an idea for that game. And the idea of navigating a maze of possibilities, are you ahead of me yet? Could be a really good way to create gameplay for a conversation. So my thought would be maybe you can get it to be good gameplay to have this type of social media interaction if you make it be kind of like combat encounters, but instead you don't like do combat. You navigate in some way that is like a fight, but not with like damage bars and health bars and stuff, if that makes sense. You could even do something even weirder and do something like the social part of the game lets you stun an enemy in combat during combat, or go full Undertale and be able to talk every single enemy out of attacking. That's vaguely text every enemy out of the ability to attack. Incredible. Game of the year. So I don't know. There's potential, right? iPetchnuts concludes, oh, and I guess Persona does this. Social links are a bit heavy-handed in the dating to mechanical benefit lifecycle, but also kind of more expected power progression than side mode with benefits. Yeah, right. I do think I like Persona 5 a lot, and I think it did this sort of well in theory, but the problem is that the benefits that you get for advancing your relationship with characters in Persona 5 are not remotely balanced. Like I feel like they didn't even try to balance them, which maybe they didn't. Maybe they just counted on that being a distinct thing about your experience. But I feel like they didn't even, if they did try, no offense, that's really bad. And Atlas, I feel like you're quite good at balance. What happened, man? Like they're so badly balanced. I don't know what's going on with that, but yes, that's one where I sort of feel like that should be good, but I don't think it was that good. A great example, though, yes, this is actually not that new of a trend, but I think it is an increasing trend. All right, pin from before about this being part of a broader fiction fantasy trend with like cell phones. Basically, the plot device of being able to use a physical device to communicate at any time over distance is kind of crazy for fantasy and media in general. The idea that as a storytelling contrivance, we now have the common conception that there would be this ability to like communicate in real time, sort of, by text, has caused a litany of changes in the fantasy and fiction genres in general. You can do so many things to make stories work in different ways by just like having a low profile magic system that lets you essentially have a smartphone, but not otherwise at the tech level where you'd have a smartphone. That's an obvious one. If you've read Brandon Sanderson's The Stormlight Archive, they like kind of invent group chat with the magic system. That's not a spoiler. You'll never ever figure out like how or where they're getting group chat from. So, but anyway, that's an example. And it's interesting from the perspective of that story because the Stormlight Archive has, for lack of a better way to describe it, kind of like a tower defense arc, or like a defend the base part of the story. And so it's very high narrative utility to be able to communicate with people around the world, but you do need to do some magic setup to do that communication. So in this case, we need to give you a product, I guess I'll say it that way to avoid spoilers, in person, but then it doesn't really run out. You can kind of indefinitely use it to communicate from far away. So we have these scouting missions that are like to open up a communication line, which actually, now that I think of it, is kind of the plot of Death Stranding too. This is a trend. All right, we're moving on to the next one. See, that's a huge thing. Anyway, if you're writing a story, consider the cell phone or texting as a concept. You might also consider not allowing that in some way. I don't think that it's unfeasible that a people could, if they had access to the magical / technology that would allow them to do it, would think of cell phones or texting sooner, but they also might not. And it's something to be deployed carefully. That would have a big effect on your story one way or another. If you explicitly cannot or explicitly can, like do communication over distance, like that. So yeah, pretty cool, and definitely a known and tracked idea in fantasy as well. You might even connect it as far to like modern, overly technical mechanics being added to otherwise a fantasy setting could even be connected to something like the lit RPG genre, where characters, often go to a fantasy world, but then the rules of the fantasy world are extremely video gamey, like are essentially just D&D, or they have a status window pop up that shows them their health bar, things like that. You could even say are distantly related to this idea. It's pretty interesting. Very, very immature. I'm just talking about like raw age idea, though. I do think we're still sort of finding what advantages that has narratively and also in game design. Pretty cool. And Mr. Foot, one trend I appreciate is clear communication of development intent during early access. Amplitude Studios has been especially good at this historically, but they really turned it up a notch in the currently running Endless Legends 2 early access. This is an example of what their communication looks like. Yeah, let's just take a look. So here you can see, a post that says "State of the Game, June 2026," and I just skimmed this for the purposes of the parlay, but you can see that it's got stuff like a graph of how certain factions in the game are doing. This post makes the point that basically there's a faction in the game that doesn't have a very good starting army, but they're performing pretty well according to the statistics. And so it discusses that a little bit more. And you can see that it's got good detail about like what they're doing and why, and other things that they're looking at, and then stuff that's coming later as well. And it's a lot of detail, right? This is like, I assume basically every month they're doing this. That's crazy. It's a lot of work to put that together. They had to put together a different kind of opposite version of this for the internal team as well, I can only imagine. Pretty cool. There are more examples. Similarly, Whiskerwood, here's that, has been improving over the past, has done a great job with their public Discord server that tracks bugs, suggestions, and balanced discussions. Sorry, I'm managing like 3 windows here. We're back on track. And this is an example of their communication. Their messages tend to be more frequent, but shorter. So here you can see they added a new thing that lets you like get rid of an excess of stone, I guess, in this crafting system. Map. Some simple examples. Again, short and sweet, but if you're getting these every week, it's really good communication from what the developer is up to. In general, Mr. Foot continues, the quality of patch notes has been improving over the last couple of years, which has helped build trust between players and devs across many communities. Definitely agree, very noticeable. Yes, the idea that even something as simple as if you play and stream a small indie game, you'll probably have a discussion with the developer of that game, like the single developer, but singular, that made that game, will just like be there, have a discussion. And I was delighted to find in the example of Gambonanza, actually took our suggestions somewhat on board, and saw the sort of interest or wisdom, or was being very polite about the potential benefits of the suggestions that we had. It was interesting. And was able to take critique in stride very well. And I don't know, I mean, I think as a lot of indie creators are, in my experience, it's not that spoiled or boutique of a profession for most people, in my opinion. I feel like it's a pretty down-to-earth group. So yeah, it's wonderful to see those people communicating more, beefing up their line of communication about where the game is going. There's a lot of things that happen when you have good communication, too. We've talked a lot in the past about how in build systems, you can potentially influence the way the build system feels to a lot of the player base without really changing anything, just by the way you word things in the game. Do a bunch of rebalancing. You could say we're trying to make everything fair, or you could just say, with the same balance changes, like we're all about putting player power first. Now, the balance changes may have nothing to do with this, but I've played a game before that did this trick. It did a patch that was mostly just nerfs, for whatever reason, said player power is at the forefront of our minds and we don't want to balance out the fun. That doesn't really make sense. Balance is there to create fun. Balanced things are more fun. When something is overpowered, it gets boring after a while. That comment doesn't make sense. And I think if you thought that comment, you would not make a bunch of nerfs to the game. I'm pretty certain they do not really mean that comment. And yet they did say it. So why? One very obvious reason, though a little bit less Occam's razor, the most obvious reason than like they're just saying this because it sounds cool to people, is that they want the community to think well of their balance changes. And this is a very common idea. If you nerf something, most developers are terrified the community will be negative and completely ignore like why they did the nerf. That being said, I have in the past seen a lot of developers that don't do a very good job communicating why they did the nerf. They do communicate it, but they don't do a very good job communicating it. Unfortunately, the example I will use is Warframe. This is a game where Warframe, I think, is a leader in the industry for having good communication, in theory. But in practice, I feel like a lot of the time, the, to be fair, somewhat complicated reasoning behind these changes is completely skipped over. Like, politely, I think in the past there have been times where I feel they didn't even begin to discuss the definitely good, totally sensible reasons they changed this or that weapons balance, and instead said, like, it's popular, you can see how popular it is, therefore we imply it's just way better, implied that that's bad, and then nerf it into the ground. But they didn't actually nerf it into the ground, and I don't think they're actually nerfing it for that reason at all. It's just they didn't really say that. They kind of did the opposite. They made a good change and made it sound bad, I think. That's how I felt anyway. Whereas I believe it's common for developers to make a, the player might not like this change, might be good, but they might not like it. But the developer makes it sound good in the patch notes, I guess. There's also games being kept alive by having a lot of patch notes, even though the community is extremely small. The communication is really good, and that does seem to be accomplishing something. Duelist, one of my favorite, in theory, competitive card game tactics board games. It's kind of hard to describe Duelist. Is currently free to play and has been kind of rebooted, but is not doing very well. It is, at least the last time I checked, was really struggling with player count and stuff, and like having content. Anyway, but they do release updates quite frequently. I've been keeping an eye on this game since I had such affection for it previously. This was the first game I made videos about, so I enjoyed playing it competitively a lot when it was a new game. And so it's been interesting to follow. It does seem like they've been hanging on, partly by just communicating pretty well, and I think they do a really good job communicating, particularly when they have balanced decisions. They talk about, you know, this is what prompted the change, here's the change, here's our perspective on what the change is. For example, we made this weaker. Do we think this is meaningfully weaker, or why or why not, you know? Sometimes it'll say things like, well, this was a 3-1 and we made it a 2-1, which sounds a lot worse. But we feel a lot of the things that it trades into well, this is actually still just as good, and it just doesn't do oppressive damage to the opponent's leader. In Duelist, your life total is a character on the board, kind of like a tanky version of a king in chess. This unit can be attacked, and then if it's killed, you lose, but you can move it. It's also slow. Like a king in chess, but with a health bar, if you want to think of it that way. So basically the idea was they felt like it was pretty much as good as like a board control piece with lower attack. And I think in this case, I would say I agree, but it doesn't have as much raw aggro potential while also getting you board control, which was really what was overpowered. Something I think a lot of players would not appreciate, not because they're stupid or short-sighted, but because that's complicated. That is meaningful, complex nuance. And they even add at the bottom some stuff like, we think this is probably a big enough nerf, so we don't plan to do more. Or we think this probably isn't a big enough nerf, but we want to be careful. Or this might be too big of a nerf. We'll buff it back up if that seems like too much. And they had a variety of those. I just think that's really good. A part of this trend I really like, Mr. Food, is that I feel the player is being treated a lot more like a game developer as well. They're being treated a lot more like they were talking to the people who would be smart enough to understand that. And if you don't, like, that's fine. But we have trust in the audience that they will understand if we treat them seriously, like a professional that understands the game. I've always been very frustrated by the duality in AAA gaming of the developer constantly insisting that they don't play the game as much as the player does, so of course they can't find all these things that players will experience within 15 minutes. But then at the same time, all of the communication about the game talks down to the audience as if they do not know anything about video games. Pick one, dude. That, like, no, it doesn't make sense. Like, first of all, you absolutely could easily play more than most players do as a developer of a game, even with most development schedules and economies, as long as the people with the money actually prioritized doing that. It's not the developer individually's fault if they work at EA or whatever, and they're not given the time to play test the game. And for all I know, EA does a great job with this, by the way. I'm just giving an example. EA has been a notoriously mixed bag in the past few years, so I don't know. I was just picking something you would know. It is famously voted the worst company in the world a lot of places, but in America, I don't know. It is famously known to be the worst company in the world by fact, ordained by the heavens. I don't know where that savagery came from. I'm not the biggest fan of EA, okay, but like, anyway. And it doesn't make sense. You absolutely could have more time to play the game if that was the priority for management, which of course it isn't. But then also flip-flopping that and saying, but we then evaluate and talk about the game as if you have no idea what's going on doesn't really work like that. That just pisses me off in general. So I do think it's interesting to see developers getting more hands dirty, just telling you the development logic they used. But even further, there is an ad for player as increasingly a bit of a game developer, modding, and also things like build systems that are like a soft, tiny, tiny form of game development where you kind of make a little thing using the systems the game offers. I would imagine also even for stuff like Factorio or whatever, where you just do build a specific thing, you gain a different kind of relationship and understanding of the deeper mechanics that are interlocking to make the fun you're enjoying work. And I think it is therefore very sensible for the developer to treat you as if you are basically a peer. You know about game development. You do understand that stuff. If it were explained like you were a professional, you would get it. And I appreciate that way of communicating. I think that's effective. I think it's resonated with people. I think seeing behind the scenes is kind of always something people like. And finally, we can't avoid the AI trend, which is part of the reason this is happening even more now, just by the by. The idea is that showing your work is now even more valuable than ever before. Artists making animated YouTube videos often include some time lapse of them making the video at the end of the video. Quite famously, Kurzgesagt, notorious in a nutshell Kurzgesagt, one of the biggest YouTube channels in existence, an animated kind of edutainment channel, made a second channel called Night Shift, which is like a different form of more storyboard-like, less animated, different style Kurzgesagt video, longer Kurzgesagt videos. They're really nice. You should go check it out. I think it's cool if you like the main channel or kind of like the main channel, but sort of want something of a similar tone, but not quite the same, like more of a storytelling thing. This is a cool channel. It's neat. I think they do a good job. They have been relentlessly accused of using AI to generate the episodes, even though the style and their amount of coverage of their process of making them makes it practically like this is one of the things you can be the most sure isn't AI. You know what I mean? This is one of the most guaranteed to be made by humans things we have in the entire world. So, in the modern age, the frescoes in the Sistine Chapel are made by AI. No, you know what I mean? But they've relentlessly been accused of being like, a copycat, not themselves, and using AI. So, of course, if you show your patch notes like this, people have more of an idea that it's you, the human, making the thing. Now, not necessarily, it's interesting with video games because, of course, coding is a place where AI has had maybe one of the most complex relationships. It's problematic in many ways still, but also has some of the clearest benefits with code, I think. If you really don't like people vibe coding or using AI to help code, like I do somewhat understand as an intermediate student of programming languages, the problems with doing that. And it's not something I've dipped my toes into yet because I don't think it's a very good way to learn potentially. But it can be a good troubleshooting tool. And I do think it has a place. I feel like a lot of people agree that it has a place, but it's fine if you don't agree with that. I'm just saying it's a place where that's complicated. And even beyond just making people not think your thing is full of AI art or whatever, it also creates this thing where, people primarily support other humans' projects when they see the human part of the project. And I can't do this, even if I want to, but a lot of people very, very often kind of forget the human on the other end of the thing. So simply being reminded by the human communicating with you that, hey, I am an individual who made this game that you enjoy. I'm really glad you enjoy it. I'm adding this thing is also a pretty major morale and like optics improvement for small developers, which obviously have to fight an uphill battle of getting people to hear them when there's the AAA space there. So it's a trend that I don't think we're going to see go anywhere anytime soon. You can probably expect, like, whatever you feel like this trend is now, I would predict that you will see that triple down in the next like decade or so. And there will be like way more patch notes, way more developer insight stuff, because it just makes more and more sense as time goes on more. So yeah, a very cool one. What a wonderful little, and not the longest crew parlay either, and a wonderful little set of glorious trends. Again, it's interesting to me because if I had done this, or if I'd been asked this, I would have said something like, not really that I'm interested in, but I am excited about these beginnings of trends, maybe, in build systems that I talked about in that little segment earlier. This was way more interesting. These are things that are happening right now, also, that are more meta industry trends. Very cool. Super unexpected. This is one of my favorite crew parlays. I just think the responses are very neat. We gained a lot from crew parlay here. Also, they're so different, right? The rise of proximity voice chat as like a kind of PvE thing or like a co-op mechanic. The pseudo social media, like being included in games as a mechanic, or that whole situation is kind of complicated as we discussed. But anyway, and then like better communication for developers in general, including like early access intent stuff. I play very few games in early access, so I didn't talk more to that specific point, but the general point gets across, I hope. Again, many of these, I hope I did an okay. It's my on-the-spot responses to whatever you say. I actually had not experienced those two trends almost at all, except for the patch notes in general improving thing. So it was interesting, the proximity voice chat and the early access stakes. I did not have the impression that early access was turning a bit of a corner. That's great to see. It's a great idea in theory, but there was a period where it was notoriously often misused. So if it is indeed that's ending, no longer heavily being misused, that's fantastic. What a thing to hear. Thank you for your responses. Folks, Crew Parlay is something that we do as a way to include people in Parlay while kind of lowering the price point. A lot of people have the $5 that is like a Twitch subscription. And I have the most overall people supporting me financially on Twitch. Not the most money, but the most people supporting me is through Twitch. And so I wanted to give something to that whole group. This is a lower tier, and I sync it up with Twitch. So if you have your Twitch account connected to Discord, it will automatically treat you as if you have the $5 Patreon tier. And then everybody can respond. Currently, it's not very populated because our community is small at the moment. So we would love to have you. It's also fine if you just enjoy listening to these, of course. That's why they're here. But I just wanted you to know, statistically, a lot of you actually already technically pay me the amount of money I would normally charge, $5 for these services. So I just want you to have them if you supported the show. Thank you very much. That's it. We're almost caught up on Parlay as well. When this Parlay is being recorded, I'm behind on Parlay by a bit after a terrible logistical period in my personal life. And so we're pretty close to being caught up. Usually I read what the next Crew Parlay is at the end of each one. This one we're behind by one, so I won't do that, but we'll be back on track after the very next one. See you pretty soon.